It is the night after the President of the United States was shot. In a quiet kitchen in New Jersey, a man named Gary Underhill is talking too fast. He's a Pentagon consultant. He is an intelligence officer. He is, his friends will later say, the most calm person they have ever known. Tonight, he is not calm. He tells them a small group inside the CIA killed Kennedy. He tells them he knows their names. He tells them he is afraid. 6 months later, Gary Underhill will be found dead. A single gunshot to the left side of his head. He was right-handed. The coroner rules it a suicide. For 62 years, his story will be called a conspiracy theory. And then, in March of 2025, his memo walks out of a vault. For 62 years, you have been told one story, one man, one rifle, one window on the 6th floor of a brick building in Dallas, one bullet that did impossible things. You have been told the file was sealed. You have been told to wait. The lawyers said 25 years. The president said 5 more, then 3 more, then COVID, then national security. And then, on the night of March 18, 2025, the United States government opened the box. 80,000 pages. 2,000 documents. No redactions. The largest declassification dump in modern American history. All in one evening. The world held its breath. Reporters refreshed PDFs at 3 in the morning. Researchers who had spent their entire adult lives chasing this case finally got their hands on the truth. And here is the strange part. Here is the part nobody expected. There was no smoking gun, no memo saying the CIA did it, no second shooter caught on film. But what came out? That is somehow worse than a confession. Stay with me. Because the cover-up that those 80,000 pages exposed was not the cover-up of an assassination. It was the cover-up of the investigation of the assassination. 12:30 in the afternoon. Dealey Plaza, the motorcade turns onto Elm Street. 3 shots, maybe 4. Witnesses disagree. The president is pronounced dead at 1 o'clock. Within 90 minutes, a 24-year-old former Marine is in custody. His name is Lee Harvey Oswald. He defected to the Soviet Union once. He came back. He spent the summer of 1963 handing out leaflets for a pro-Castro group in New Orleans. 2 days later, on live national television, a Dallas nightclub owner named Jack Ruby steps out of a crowd in a police basement and shoots Oswald in the stomach. Oswald is dead before the ambulance arrives. Both witnesses to the truth are gone in 48 hours. President Lyndon Johnson appoints a commission. Chief Justice Earl Warren leads it. 10 months later, 888 pages land on Johnson's desk. The verdict: Oswald acted alone. There was no conspiracy, foreign or domestic. Period. The commission also gives America a gift it never wanted. A theory that one bullet. Commission Exhibit 399. Passed through Kennedy's neck. Struck Governor Connally, broke a rib, exited his chest, shattered his wrist, and ended in his thigh. They call it the single bullet theory. The country calls it the magic bullet. For most Americans, that is when the doubt begins. Polls in the 70s show that 7 out of 10 Americans no longer believe the Warren Report. In 1979, a second congressional investigation, the House Select Committee on Assassinations, actually contradicts Warren. They conclude Kennedy was probably killed as part of a conspiracy. They cannot say by whom. They seal their files for 50 years. Then comes 1991. Oliver Stone releases JFK. The film ends with a title card telling the country those sealed files will not open until 2029. The country erupts. Congress responds the only way Congress can. They pass a law, the President John F. Kennedy Assassination Records Collection Act of 1992. It mandates full release, 25 years. October 26, 2017. That deadline arrives. The CIA asks for an extension. The FBI asks for an extension. Trump grants 6 months, then 3 more years. Biden grants more. COVID, they say. National security, they say. By January 2025, the deadline is almost 8 years overdue. And then, 3 days into his second term, Donald Trump signs Executive Order 14176. He hands the pen to Robert Kennedy Jr. He looks at the cameras and says, "That's a big one. A lot of people have been waiting for this for years, for decades. And everything will be revealed. 15 days for the JFK files." That is what the order says. The intelligence community has 15 days to hand over what they have hidden for 62 years. March 18, 2025. 7 o'clock Eastern Time. The first batch drops. 31,419 pages. 3.5 hours later, another 37,127. By morning, the press has a verdict. And the verdict is a sigh. No smoking gun. That is the headline. NPR, CBS, the New York Times, the Washington Post. All of them. The same phrase, the same shrug. The conspiracy theorists feel cheated. The historians feel calm. The agency feels relief. And the country, by lunchtime, moves on to other news. But here's the thing, about 80,000 pages. Nobody has actually read them yet. It will take months. Independent researchers, the Mary Farrell Foundation, the National Security Archive, journalists who have lived inside this case for 40 years, they start reading. Slowly, page by page, footnote by footnote. And what they find, buried in the bureaucratic dust, hidden inside accounting memos and travel vouchers and personnel files, is something the morning headlines completely missed. The story was never going to be on the front page. It was going to be in the footnotes. What was inside? Not a confession, not a name. Something stranger. A 1962 memo describing how CIA operatives in Mexico City marked the telephone hardware at the Soviet and Cuban embassies with chemicals only visible under ultraviolet light, so they could verify which lines were live. 8 months later, Oswald walked into those exact embassies. A Schlesinger memo, finally unredacted, revealing that 47% of diplomats in some U.S. embassies were CIA officers. In Paris alone, 123 of the embassy staff were undercover spies. In Chile, 11 of 13 political officers. A 1961 Inspector General report on the assassination of the Dominican dictator Trujillo, naming the CIA officers who supplied the rifles. A document confirming the CIA had founded and quietly owned a gun distributor called Interarmco, the same supply chain that fed Klein's Sporting Goods of Chicago, the same mail-order shop where Lee Harvey Oswald bought his Mannlicher Carcano rifle in March of 1963. None of this proves a conspiracy. The historians are careful to say so. But all of it proves something else. The agency that was supposed to investigate Kennedy's death, the agency that swore to Congress, it had nothing to hide. Owned the world, the killer walked through, phones, embassies, surveillance, the very rifle. And then there is George Joannides. In the summer of 1963, in New Orleans, Lee Harvey Oswald handed out pro-Castro leaflets on a downtown street. A group of Cuban exiles confronted him. Punches were thrown. Oswald was arrested. 3 days later, he debated those same exiles on local radio. The exile group was called the DRI, Directorio Revolucionario Estudiantil, Cuban Student Directorate. They were funded by the CIA. Their secret case officer, the man writing their checks, planning their operations, coordinating their psychological warfare, was a Greek-American CIA officer named George Joannides. He worked under the alias Howard Mark Gebler. He even had a fake D.C. driver's license. In 1978, 15 years later, Congress reopens the case. The House Select Committee on Assassinations is hunting for a possible conspiracy. The CIA generously offers a liaison officer to help the investigators, a man to walk them through the files, a friendly face, a guide. That liaison officer is George Joannides, the same George Joannides who, in 1963, ran the Cuban exile group that publicly tangled with Lee Harvey Oswald 3 months before Dallas. He sits in those meetings. He watches the congressmen ask questions. He hands them documents. He hands them sanitized documents. And he never, not once, tells them who he is. He dies in 1990, taking the secret with him. For 35 years after that, the CIA continues to deny he had any operational role with the DRI. It is a lie maintained across 7 CIA directors. In July 2025, a House task force forces his personnel file into the open. The lie collapses on a single page. So what is still hidden? About 3,500 documents remain partially or fully classified. 2,400 FBI files, only recently discovered, are still locked. 500 IRS records on Oswald himself. And somewhere in a CIA records vault sits a small gray film canister. A whistleblower named Thomas Piercy walked past it in 2009. He told the House task force in November 2025 what was written on the label. Oswald in Mexico City. Inside that canister, according to a CIA document, Piercy says he read with his own eyes. There are roughly 2,300 photographs, taken on 4 Hasselblad cameras, aimed at the Soviet and Cuban embassies during the exact weeks Oswald was visiting them in late September of 1963. 2,300 photographs. The American public has never seen one of them. After 62 years and 80,000 pages, that is what we know, that the case is not closed. That the largest declassification in U.S. history was, by the agency's own quiet accounting, partial. And here is the part I want you to sit with for a moment. We still do not know who killed John F. Kennedy. The official answer is still one man, alone, with a mail-order rifle. Maybe that is true. Maybe it always will be. But we now know, beyond any reasonable doubt, that the people whose job it was to prove it were hiding their own footprints. For 6 decades, across 11 presidents. If the largest secret in modern American history needed 62 years just to begin cracking, what about the secrets of our time? What about the files being sealed today with deadlines set for 2070, for 2090, for the year your grandchildren will read them? Gary Underhill sat at a kitchen table in 1963 and tried to tell someone the truth. We dismissed him as paranoid for 62 years. We were wrong by exactly 3,500 documents. The Joannides file was not the only ghost the 2025 release coughed up. Buried in the same boxes was a single memo, dated May 8, 1973, signed by a man named Sidney Gottlieb, the CIA's chief chemist. Friends called him the agency's Dr. Strangelove. In the spring of 1953, Sidney Gottlieb stood in a bare laboratory in Building 1003 at Fort Detrick and dropped 25 micrograms of LSD into a glass of Cointreau. The man who drank it was a U.S. Army biochemist named Frank Olson. 9 days later, Frank Olson went through a 13th floor window of the Statler Hotel in Manhattan. For 50 years, Sidney Gottlieb's program had a name only the agency was allowed to whisper, MKultra. In 2026, a new tranche of his files just slipped quietly out of the same vaults that hid Joannides. And what was inside makes the JFK cover-up look like a warm-up.